Uy, good evening, good evening. Matt, nagbabalik tayo sa Project Offbeat, right? Medyo na-miss na natin 'to. I think we're filming this right after Holy Week, no? So medyo matagal na natin 'to
That's
hindi
true.
ginagawa, Matt, no? But I'm really excited because we have another episode with us today, no? Actually, Matt, I want to get straight right into it, no? Today's episode is actually a very unconventional career, at least from my point of view. Okay, at least in
Uh
the
huh.
Philippine setting, I haven't heard too much of this career, no. So it really intrigued me to be able to talk about the career of urban planning today. Matt, it's actually a much needed. Alam mo naman, just recently, uuwi lang ako ng Ortigas, no? 1.5 to 2 hours one way, pare. 2 hours,
You
no?
gotta work from home.
Kaya nga ayoko na mag-work sa office ngayon, no, given the the monstrosity of our traffic, no. But that is why the topic of urban planning, and later on we will expound more on that with our special guest today, no, is so important,
Uh
di
huh.
ba? Dati I
Yeah.
actually told my class, oh, class, I want you to tackle about the wicked problem of EDSA's traffic. So I'm really excited
Mm-hmm.
today because we're actually bringing in someone that may have concrete solutions, concrete insights about solving EDSA's traffic. Diba? So Matt, can you somewhat onboard our guest now about the background of our special guest today?
Well, our guest today is the CEO of Shared Use Mobility Center, an organization advocating for affordable and sustainable mobility across the US. He also has a master's in urban planning from Harvard and writes in his newsletter, Makeshift Mobility, on trends and innovations on transport. You know what? I think Kenneth Abante would actually really enjoy reading those
Yun.
articles in that newsletter.
Oo nga, mga Coffbeat, I hope you remember our episode with Mr. Ken Abante, di ba? When you talked about policy research, I think may intertwining sa mga ginagawa ni Sir Ken with our guest today, no? So, um, anyways, Matt, let's get right through it, no? Our guest today is Mr. Benjie de la Pena, and he will be
Yes.
joining the Project Offbeat podcast to talk about the life of urban planning, no? Sir Benji, ay sabi niya nga pala tanggalin natin yung Sir Matt, no? So,
Oo nga
Benji,
pala.
welcome to the show. Good evening. Matt, can we pull Sir Benji?
Good evening,
Yun.
Lance and Matt. Thanks for having me, or good morning. Depends, I guess, what time people are watching this.
Oh, ayos.
But greetings from Chicago.
Ayos. Benji, you know what? Can we start with, I think your background, you actually graduated from University of the Philippines, but how did you get there to, Chicago, being where you are right now?
Mahaba-habang storya yan. So, yeah, that's about 30 years worth of a story now. No, my undergrad was journalism in UP,
Oh,
Mascom, so advertising.
interesting. Okay.
And I went to journalism because I could write, or at least they told me I could write when I was in high school.
Uh-huh.
But by the time I guess I was in the middle of my undergrad, I realized ay hindi ko yata kaya maging journalist, right? Because
Uh-huh.
I had classmates who were real journalists, the likes of Edling Gao, right? Na parang
Mhm.
hindi ko yata quality yan. So I went and shuffled around after school with different careers. So I'm a jack of all trades, kind of. I wrote for a politician. I wrote for magazines. I taught high school English in St. Scholastica, Manila. Hello, my former students. Madami-dami yan. And then I worked corporate with Ayala. I worked corporate communications. I did a bit of HR. I did a bit of. I actually I was the manager of bata pa kayo. One of the earliest internet providers in the Philippines was GNet.
Ooh.
And I managed that at the very start before this was all dial-up. And then at some point, I joined Manila Water, the takeover team for Manila Water, and I was
Yeah.
a change manager and
Mhm.
comms. And that's where I fell in love with the city and basically looking at what was going on. Kasabay nun, I was playing SimCity. I started playing SimCity. And so meron tayong kind of contrast
Kaya
there. Here you
pala.
are shaping cities. What's going on with their city? My role in Manila Water was I formed the community relations organization. That meant that we were all over the east side, in contact with the barangays and the cities. And that's where I started looking into urban planning. What was this, right? And as a mentor used to say, fall in love with the problem, not the solution. I fell in love with the kinds of challenges and problems that urban planning had. At some point, parang ayoko nang maging dilettante. I was reading a lot of stuff. I was playing SimCity. I was doing a lot of stuff, but I didn't feel like I was qualified. So I applied for grad school. Chamba, I got accepted in the big name schools I applied for. So I
Mm.
went that way, and that's how I got to urban planning.
Grabe. Napaka-offbeat pala, no? Imagine from a journalism, communications background, no? You're now doing
Mm.
urban planning, right? Benji, can you talk to us, no, about what the heck is urban planning?
Yeah.
Honestly, when we came into this show, I for one think maybe urban planners are the ones that are, on their desk thinking of how to solve EDSA's traffic or maybe a city's traffic, no? But based on researching about you, it urban planning might be bigger and wider than that. No, can you explain more to us about this career?
Yeah, multiple yan. Very few people actually really know. Well, it's more now, but when I started 20 years ago in urban planning, very few people in the Philippines knew what urban planning was. In fact, meron akong kaibigan, when I said, I'm a planner, akala niya wedding planner. So it's like,
Ang
but
layo.
the
Ang
key
layo.
thing is to say, and you're right, it's very big. No? The key thing is urban and planning. So planning first is, what is planning? Planning is figuring out what is it that you're trying to do and why. Then figuring out, what you need to do to get to those goals, and then implementing them, and then the tail end saying, did we achieve it?
Yeah.
Evaluating. So urban plan, then we take, that's what the planning side is. Urban is the scale of where people live, right? And in the world is more than 50% urban now, right? So the 8 billion people in the world, more than 4 billion live in cities. And that's kind of where we have
Half,
wound
no?
up
Yeah,
as
mga
a
50%.
planet. We are an urban planet, right?
Yeah.
And the growth of cities is huge. I think the number is 1.5 million people per week move into cities around the world. So, going back to what you were saying, and it's related. No? You said parang very offbeat. Urban planners are the ultimate generalists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because nearly everything happens in a city, right? It's where we live, it's where we
That's
work,
true.
it's
Yeah.
where we get around. It's about economics, it's about ecology, right? Because what kind of an environment do we grow in? So it's nearly everything except for farming, right? And big uh, extractive mining. Nearly everything about that the humans do occurs in cities, right? In fact, may mga researchers who argue you can't disentangle civilization from cities, right? Because when we started
Yep.
forming cities, uh, 10,000, 8,000 years ago, yun, we started forming civilization. So anyway, so you're as an urban planner, you are a generalist. And going back to what we were saying in about planning, ang tanong is, what is happening in our cities? What
Mm-hmm.
do we want our cities to do and achieve? How do we get that there? And then how do we know we're getting there? So you like mentioning EDSA traffic, right? Transportation is one part of urban planning, although that's a transportation planning is a class of discipline by itself, right?
Right.
And part of what we as generalists and system thinkers, so we are also system thinkers,
Mm.
have to ask is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? So, for instance, you mentioned EDSA traffic, and we've been talking about EDSA traffic since the 1970s.
Uh-huh.
Ang tanong ng urban planner is that the right problem to solve? Right? Is it traffic we're trying to solve? And then questions like, what is the cause of traffic? And that might lead us to say, actually, not traffic is not the problem. Transportation is the problem, and those are two very different things.
Ooh.
Traffic is how do you move vehicles from one place to another. Right? At least vehicle traffic, because traffic is a general term. And then transportation is how do you move people from one place
Mm.
to another.
Mm.
And so yeah. So sorry, long answer. That's what an urban planner does. An urban planner thinks about what's happening in the city, and then how do you get the city to achieve what society wants for it to achieve. And there are many places to do that work, right? So you could be working
Sure.
for a city or a country or a regional government as part of government to say, ano ba mangyayari sa Iloilo or may ba mangyayari sa Hong Kong or whatever. Or you could be working in advocacy and not-for-profit world saying, what does the government need to pay attention to, our private sector? Or you could be working in the private sector with very large-scale development, which a lot of our real estate developers do, saying, ano ba mangyayari sa Calabarzon or sa Laguna or whatever in the province, right? So there are many places, but it's basically how do people live and work and where do they do it and how should it function? That's still different from urban
Yeah.
design, which is what does it
Uh-huh.
look like? Okay, I'll stop there.
Okay, astig nun, ah. Meron bang ano, sir, kapag ay sorry Benji 'no, meron bang kung may urban planner, meron din bang mga provincial planner, gano'n?
Oh, actually, in the Philippines, ang classification natin ng urban planner is environmental planning. So
Okay,
meron,
yun
so
pala.
it can exist at
Okay,
very, very different scales, right?
okay.
From provincial, which cities are we going to start growing? What kind of roads do we need to invest in? To very district, di ba, anong mangyayari sa Ermita, anong plano natin, or merong bagong mall, or where do we put the mall? So, ganun. Meron yan. Meron ding inter-country planning, right? Because cities
Oh,
don't
that's
really care
interesting.
about boundaries, right? They can grow across boundaries.
Baka sa North and South Korea merong inter-country planning.
Hindi, yun lang. Dahil
Probably,
hard
no?
boundary yun.
Yeah.
Hard boundary.
Malinaw yung
Pero
boundary
there are
nila, eh.
planners who talk
Yeah.
about what is that edge look like.
Yeah.
That was planned.
I was initially gonna ask like, what are the outputs, I guess, that an urban planner does, no? But you already kind of mentioned like you work with these private firms or even these government firms. Now I'm kind of curious, how does that look in terms of your metrics for success?
Yeah.
How do you measure if a project that you're into actually is successful in the
Yeah.
eyes of whatever firm or whatever government that
Yeah.
you're working for?
I'll answer the first part of that question too. No, what are the instruments? Because that's actually very
Sure, sure.
related, right? General Eisenhower, he's not a planner. He's a military planner and former president. Like to say that plans are nothing. Planning is everything.
Okay.
So when we talk about the instruments, right, it depends on where you're working. It could be a strategic document for a city or a district of a city or a neighborhood, or it could be a strategic document for a network of cities that basically saying what is the current conditions, what do we need to achieve, and that could be things like make housing cheaper and much more accessible, or reduce traffic congestion, or make
Right.
transportation easier. So it could be in a strategic document, or it could be in a strategic plan, which is basically from the document you go, oh, here's the physical plan, right? Dito natin ilalagay yung zones ng industry. Dito natin maglalagay tayo dito ng parks, or we're making sure that every person is within 10 minutes of a park. Or we're going to say, we're going to plan these things so that any person is within 15 minutes of where they need to work or live, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yung tools non include things like land use, determining land use, which is basically land use is how is this land going to be used? Is it going to be residential? Is it going to be commercial? Is it going to be mixed?
Right. Oh.
Whatever else. So the other feature, the two of urban planning is these are long gestation periods, right? You can create a plan and finish it in a year or two, but the implementation of the plan may take 50 years or 60 years or whatever. So, back to your question. Ano yung metric? One is, did you complete the plan? Is there buy-in? Is the community on board? Right. Second, are there resources that will actually develop that plan? So you can say, for instance, i-mix use natin yan, so hindi separate yung work from where people live and where people shop. Pero kung walang pera, so there's no budget that goes to it, whether it's corporate budget or government budget, then that's one indicator of failure or success. Kung walang commitment. Again, these are plans that could take 10 years, could take 50 years. If there's no
Uh-huh.
commitment to say we're going to build it and here's the money for it, then it's not going to be successful. It's not going to happen, right? The other is metrics of success is, are you actually achieving what you set out to do? So again, kung yung goal mo is to make it a livable, walkable city, are people
Yes.
walking? Are people using less cars? Are people
Yeah.
happy? Right? Are people healthy? So ganon. So again, from a very generalist standpoint, you can figure out what that is. So classic example, Metro Manila, like all other cities, and people who live it, always lament
Yes.
na, oh, we have no plans, it's terrible. By the way,
Oh.
that's uniform. Nearly every city complains about that.
Mm.
And then we will look to um, uh, plans that we created in the 1910s or the 1950s and say, look, that there was a plan then, we didn't do it because hindi na implement, right? Or
Yeah.
there wasn't money that got put. Burnham had a plan for Manila in the 1910s.
Hmm.
The national government did not put money in that plan, so we didn't
Yeah.
achieve it.
It's very interesting na your career name is urban planning, but you're also judged by the way your plan will be executed later on. No? Kasi
Yeah.
parang 'di ba kunwari data scientists can gather all the data that they can and analyze it all they can. But then at the end of the day kung hindi siya gagamitin ng kumpanya, 'di ba? Wala, hindi siya ma-execute, 'di ba? It's similar
Oh,
to yung ginagawa niya Sir Benji, no? Which is pretty exciting na you also consider how to execute it, 'di ba? Among all of your plans.
yeah, and for any kind of planning, right? Even in business planning naman, there's things you can control and things you
Yeah.
cannot control, right?
Sure.
So part of the, again, going back to what Eisenhower said, the plan is nothing. Planning is everything.
Mm.
And part of planning is seeing ano ba yung nangyayari? Ano ba yung nangyayari and how do we pivot, right? There's a branch of planning that is called scenario planning, where you say,
Yeah.
what are the possible scenarios of the future? Because really, you can't predict, right? And then what you're trying to do is, in any scenario, you concentrate on the most important things. So even if it changes, you are still able to achieve the goals you set out in your plan.
I see. Benji, why do you think that maybe the commoner, no, the common Filipino, no, why do you think should they care about urban planning? Earlier, you just mentioned this is a plan of maybe 2 years, 3 years, no,
Mm.
and it might be baka after na nga ng generation nila bago yun lumabas, 'di ba?
Mhm.
Why should they care about urban planning at this point in time, at the present, 'di ba?
Because we make decisions today that shape our future. So, for instance, a decision to say, we're going to widen Commonwealth Avenue so it's 20 lanes para mas mabilis ang traffic. And what we're going to do is, pedestrians, ito lang, we're going to build these cross pedestrian overpasses.
Right.
So when you made that decision, you set priorities, and you said your priority was, we're going to try to solve traffic congestion. You made these decisions on assumptions that people should be able to question and say, traffic ba talaga importante? What do we know about expanding lanes and whether that does that solve traffic? And clearly, it doesn't solve traffic. We know that. We've known that for 30 years. So it matters to people because it matters to how they live now and the decisions we make now,
Yeah.
and how they will live in the future. It could be in 5 years, it could be in 20 years, it could be their children's future. But the decisions we make now will shape that future.
Sir Benji, you mentioned something a while ago. You said something about 15-minute cities,
Yeah,
and I think this is a very popular urban planning concept that has been, viral or trending in Twitter from
yeah.
time to time, and it's always been pointed at Metro Manila in general, where we don't have that much green spaces, we don't have that much walkable um, areas, and we essentially fail the 15-minute city. Do you agree with this kind of assessment of Manila? And what would you say is the biggest hurdle or challenge that Manila as a city
Yeah.
faces?
This is really, it's interesting, right? Because we don't have, in our big infrastructure, we don't facilitate pedestrian movement. So hindi siya walkable. Clearly, like
Yeah.
you said, we don't have enough parks. Pero, and here's a thing about urban planning, right? We've had our mistakes also in the decades, right? What happens in cities is cities self-assemble, right? So there's a
Uh-huh.
line of thinking which I ascribe to, that the role of an urban planner is not hard planning, it's gardening. And by gardening, I mean, what are the things we encourage now that we then allow to grow? So if you're a gardener, you're not going to plan that the rose bush or your gumamela has to be this exact height.
Yeah.
What you're doing
Yeah.
is, how do you treat the soil so that the gumamela grows and flowers? What do you plant around it? So, okay. So, in that frame, the question of 15 minutes is, it depends on who you are and where you live.
Yeah.
If you live in a urban poor community in the Philippines, actually anywhere in the world, you have a 15-minute city, because there are sari-sari stores you walk out to if you needed to buy
Ooh,
something. There's a grocery
that's
store
really good.
nearby, maybe not be the largest. Makakabili ka ng monoblock chair kung kailangan mo ng monoblock chair.
Yeah.
Kung nagtatrabaho ka in the vulcanizing shop, kalapit lang yan. So that actually exists, and these are user-generated, is a term that Verbs likes to use. Cities, that actually is the structure. What happens is, because our planning is like, oh, we're trying to organize it, and we're, the machine understanding of the city, we will separate these things. So you can't work near where you live. You live in Ortigas, maybe you can work in Ortigas, or maybe you work in Makati. So there you go. Or things like, we're not doing anything on housing to make it cheaper. The cheapest you can buy is in Laguna. So you're going to have to travel 2.5 hours every day to get to
Yeah,
work.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, so 15-minute cities are ideal. But here's the thing. If you garden your city correctly, that's how cities naturally grow. It's when you start
Oh.
saying, it's when you start solving the wrong problems, that you get these kind of distortions in travel, distortions in cost, right? So if you open our eyes, there are lots of places in Metro Manila that are actually 15-minute cities. It's not the 15-minute cities we like to imagine, which
Mm.
is
Uh-huh. Yeah.
very high-end Western.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Uh, but actually, people can function. Also, it's the we don't prioritize people walking, and so there's not enough facilities. People walk anyway because they have to, and so that actually happens. So the question for an urban planner like me is, how do we encourage more of that, and how do we encourage those communities to build up resources so that they get better? And that tends to actually happen if you let them.
Tama.
Sa akin, habang sagot, as I said, madaldal ako. So,
That's really interesting. Actually, parang may nakita akong meme dati na this is how the government like designed a walkway, let's say for people, but
mm,
people will still walk on the
desire
grass.
lines.
So
Yes.
parang sometimes
Ako
it's a
ata yun,
very
Matt.
funny concept.
Ganun ako eh.
Oo nga.
Uh, it happens everywhere, right? They're called desire lines. You
Yeah.
say you have a little quadrangle of a park, tapos yung architect mo saying, I want people to move in straight lines.
Yeah.
Diba? So ilalagay ko, but people move the way they want to move. So as a simple example,
Yeah.
uh, crosswalks, which we don't have enough of in the Philippines. If you have an intersection, crosswalks usually are around like the square, if it's a square intersection. So people, if you're going from one corner to the opposite corner, kailangan mong tumawid in two legs, right? Because ang sabi natin, may importante yung traffic so dapat diretso yung traffic. If you look at a city like Japan, and there lots of other cities are copying this, they have what you call barn scrabbles, or full pedestrian crossings, that you can go the X route, because that's how people travel.
Oh.
So there's a value statement in
Yeah.
that, the
Yeah.
design of that intersection.
So, galing talaga ng mga Hapon mag-design, no? I mean, they have it all figured out. Like, ang galing. Ang galing ng ano.
Yeah, and that start interesting. We could go into Tokyo, but one of the things they did very early is to say children are important, so they need to be safe. We
Yeah.
will build our communities around access to school, elementary school, and preschool and high school. And
Galing.
then cars are not important. We're going to charge and prevent parking on the street. That
Mm.
said, and this is a message for Metro Manila. No? Tokyo is 30 million people.
Mhm.
It's huge. It's the largest, if not.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, uh, Yangtze might be bigger, but Pearl River Delta might be bigger. But it's huge. And so when we talk about Metro Manila and people say, masyadong madaming tao, need to get rid of people, which I always ask how. But we're two-thirds only of Tokyo, and Tokyo functions really, really well. Right? So it's not the number of people, it's the
Yeah.
planning decisions you make.
Galing. Sige. Benji, earlier you were actually, illustrating, di ba, perpendicular, X-shape, di ba? Na-interest lang ako, no? As an urban planner, how do you look at roads? Like, for example kami, di ba? Pag nakita namin daan ay shucks traffic or ay shucks maluwag, di ba? But I bet an urban planner like you probably also has a different outlook when looking at into cities, no?
Yeah.
Can you take us through, the eyes of an urban planner when looking into a city? Kunwari, first time mo bumisita sa Tokyo, ano yung
Yeah.
mga pinapansin mo? Ano yung, di ba, yung ina-absorb mo in hopes of, taking home in your career?
How do people move around? That's
How
the
do
first thing,
Oh.
right?
people move
How many
around?
people are on the street? Right? Is
Mm.
there sidewalks? Interesting thing of Tokyo, there are lots, the interior roads, walang actual sidewalks. Merong curbs, pero walang sidewalks. But if you are a pedestrian, you can walk on the street safely
Uh-huh. Yeah.
because the
Galing.
speeds are lowered for
Yeah.
cars. There's no parking, right? And there's no street parking. So when I get into a city, the first of all, you don't judge a city by the central business district. Right? The central business district is always where capital goes and it's bought and everything is paid in a different way, right? You go to where people actually live, and then you look at how are people moving? What are they doing? Diba? Is the street alive? Are there stores? Are there people walking? Are there places to go? Or is the street dead where there's nothing but vehicles coming through? Especially if it's vehicles and just traffic, which means
Okay.
things are just passing. No?
Yeah.
May puno ba? Diba? Is there plants? Are there plants, right? What do the houses look like? Are they tall buildings? Are they small? Are they multiple sizes? And that's kind of your clue to how a
Galing.
city is functioning.
Yeah.
One of the things I like to say is you need to judge a city on the ground and experiencing it on the street. You cannot judge a city from the air in a
Immersion.
plane.
Yeah.
Okay? You need to experience it on the street, and you need to see, because cities
Ganda.
are about people.
Yeah.
And so, is it working for people? Is it not working?
Benji, it interested me, no, because I have sort of two kinds of residences here in the Philippines. May isa na sa subdivision, no? And may isa na may maliit kaming parang condo unit in the heart of Ortigas, no?
Hmm.
What's your take on subdivision? Because when you mentioned earlier, how do people move? Honestly, wala kang magawa kapag nasa subdivision ka. Ang magagawa mo lang, probably mag-jogging, 'di ba? At pumunta sa neighbor basketball court or whatnot, no? Pero kapag you're in the heart of, maybe in a condo, heart of, a busy district, kahit saan ka pumunta,
Mhm.
pwedeng may mabili ka, 'di ba? Or pwedeng may makausap ka, 'di ba? Do you
Mhm.
think subdivisions are, I don't know, not too good for a city, or may value rin naman sila?
I would say not to. They could be better. Let's
They
see,
could
not
be
to. They could be better.
right.
Why do we have subdivisions? One is because of the way we develop. We do real estate development. Second is the idea of enclaves, protected ka. Diba? That's why when we say subdivision
Yeah.
in Metro Manila, we actually mean gated community.
Yeah.
And it's a product too of a particular way of thinking of land use na kailangan mong i-separate. And it's not just separating uses, it's separating, middle class ka, dito ka.
Mm.
Medyo mayaman ka, dito ka. Very mayaman ka, dun ka. Diba? And usually, mas mayaman, mas mataas yung fences.
Yeah.
Right? In nature, anything that is a monoculture is usually not healthy and not sustainable. So if there's only one kind of plant growing, you will only get one kind of creature on it, and it's very fragile. Or if you're farming, if you're only growing corn and corn and corn and corn and there's nothing else, may exhaust, right, yung soil. It's the same thing for us as humans because we say, and that's a product of regulatory decisions to say, bawal iba, ano lang, residential lang, which is why things are not allowed. And as a comparison, yung Quezon City project areas, di ba? Those are actually subdivisions that were
Yeah.
government run at the start because it's mainly residential. Pero yung residential mo, you were allowed to do stores. Kaya nagkakaroon ng mga sari-sari store, di ba? And then so there you could
Right.
go to the sari-sari store. So anything that is single use, with the exception of factories, because again, it depends on what's next to it.
Galing. Ganda nila tingnan na isang plant lang, pare-parehas yung tsura, 'di ba? Ang linis tingnan. Pero hindi pala yan gano'n kaganda, no? In terms of a city kind of concept. Galing.
Because these are ecosystems.
Mm.
So classic story ni James C. Scott is when the Germans, and this was in the 16th, 17th century, started getting scientific about their forestry. Ang ginawa nila is they started planting trees in rows in the royal forest and then started eliminating all the undergrowth. Kasi ang importante sa'yo yung puno eh. And then we want them to grow orderly para madaling i-harvest. Guess what? They got better harvest in the first 5 years, and then the trees started dying earlier and growing smaller because the undergrowth is actually very, very important for trees. And now with the
Galing.
research of Suzanne Simard, we actually understand that trees communicate, right? And they share resources. So, ganun yun. So if you're in a subdivision, internally, maganda yung bahay mo siguro, pero wala kang magawa. In many places too, hindi mo makausap yung kapitbahay mo. So,
Benji, I was thinking about subdivisions and what's the difference between the US and the Philippines? But now I realize, hey, the US isn't that necessarily friendly for the movement of people either. I'm thinking, oh, their subdivisions are even bigger and more private pa nga eh. Paminsan, you have to access it through a freeway in some parts also. So I wanted to ask first, like, what would you say is the starkest difference of US and the Philippines? But now I'm not so sure if there is anymore.
lots of differences. Well, first of all, a lot of planning decisions in the US were, particularly in the last century, were
Sure.
driven by racism. What do I mean?
Okay.
First of all, they were actually developments that by the covenant said, bawal ka kung Hudyo o kung itim ka o kung hindi ka puti, bawal ka dito. Right? And so you could buy. Or like us naman, all the houses are this cost. And then they also made decisions from a financing standpoint to say, if you live in an area na hindi lahat puti, banks won't lend you money to buy a house or to improve your house. So yung areas that were more diverse, nagkaroon ng disinvestment, and even the government would invest. And then also they decided to connect their cities with highways, which was a good idea. But they also ran the highways through the city and carved up. Guess what areas did they carve up? The areas that were more diverse, where they had disinvested. And then that opened up the countryside. And so this is a thing called sprawl, where big developers would buy up pieces of land, turn them into subdivisions, as we call them, right? Gated communities. And then there you have
the
no
suburbs,
choice. Exactly, suburban. You had no choice because there's no public transportation and it's too spread out for public transportation. You have to take a car to get anywhere.
Exactly.
That's actually happening in the Philippines too, particularly for the middle class. That's why we're generating a lot of trips, because housing within Metro Manila is expensive.
Exactly.
People can only afford to buy or maybe even rent in the surrounding areas. So people have to travel in. So same dynamics because it was the same slight siguro medyo different lang sa atin. It's not racism, but it is
still discrimination.
It's discrimination, right?
Yeah.
It is the discrimination of the elite in the middle class versus the lower incomes. but it ran on this. In the US, for a long time, it was overtly racism that made those decisions and separated people out.
Benji, among all of the cities that you visited in, which has been your favorite?
Oh my God.
Isa lang, isa
Can I
lang.
choose one? Hindi ba? Isa lang? Mahirap. Hindi.
Isa lang,
Okay.
isa
I
lang.
can choose isa lang.
I mean,
A
as a
general
planner,
category,
no? As a planner.
Top
Yeah, go
5
ahead.
ganon.
I like big cities. Right?
Big
I love Metro
cities.
Manila. It's my home city, right? Even if
Wow.
even if it has
Talaga.
problems, right?
Yeah,
I think those problems can be solved. I Cities that I really like. I like Mexico City. Same
Of
size as
course.
Metro Manila. Size bigger
Of
actually
course.
than Metro Manila. And it's same set of problems. I like Bogota.
Mm.
I enjoy Copenhagen because it's nice and small, and it's the same thing with Amsterdam. I like Berlin. In the US, I like New York and Chicago. So ang hirap to pick just one because I love cities as they are. I love Tokyo. I haven't spent enough time in Tokyo
Yeah.
to understand it. I love Singapore because it works really well because everything's taken care of for that. So
Yeah.
I love Hong Kong, but I haven't been to Hong
Yeah.
Kong for over a decade, so I don't know how things are now. So ang dami
It just
siguro.
reopened. It just reopened for tourists.
So
So
nice.
I
perfect
know.
time.
I haven't. I last visited Hong Kong. It was under a decade from the takeover, so
Yeah.
I don't know how it's functioning now.
Grabe.
Shanghai, I love Shanghai.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had to pick one. General is I like cities. I like big cities, and I like people. So I like seeing where people go.
And I think you would agree, no, na if a city is designed well and the urban planning is done well, it really enhances your traveling experience, your enjoyment of that particular city.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
as a tourist, right? And that's the thing is if you live in a city, what are you? Are you a tourist? Are you a critic? Are you a citizen? Right? Do you
sure.
live there? Right? And hopefully we live in the cities we live in, which means we participate in it, and the problems of the city are problems we own, and we figure out how do we solve this, versus just being a visitor where you're just passing. You can be a visitor in your own city and feel like because you live in a subdivision and you just take your car,
Yeah,
then the
yeah.
only thing that you suffer is you as a traveler. So nawala ako dun sa question. Sorry, man. Yeah, it's good to see. It enhances not just how people live in it, but it also can lower costs, right? If it can lower the cost of transportation, the cost of
Yeah.
living, the cost of health, because you're not dealing with pollution or stress or anxiety from living in very hard to live in areas. So yeah, it
Agree.
actually helps us live better.
Yeah. Benji, earlier you said Metro Manila, no?
Yeah.
That's among the cities that you actually
I love Metro Manila.
love, diba? So I wanna pivot naman to, of course, the local scene, no? Sa atin dito sa Metro Manila, you are from, you've been working in Chicago for a couple of years now.
Mm.
Siguro ang tanong ko, from that point of view,
Yeah.
ang layo-layo, diba, no? Meron na bang improvements ang Metro Manila in terms of urbanization, in terms of mobility, 'di ba? From your
Wow.
perspective.
Quick question,
Ah,
no, Benji. When
yeah.
was the last time you were back here
I was there
in Manila?
January.
Uy, ayun,
Uy,
ayun.
I was there
kind
in
of missed.
January.
Yeah,
Okay,
saktong-sakto.
recent, recent.
Fresh na fresh ang insights niya, no?
Oo nga eh.
Um, we'll caveat this way, right? Every city has problems. Most cities share the same kinds of problems.
Really?
I see. Yeah.
But that also means that we can borrow solutions from elsewhere. Right?
Right.
What will work somewhere else will probably work with us too. Has there been progress? Yes, from the standpoint of are there people talking about the problems and trying to do something about it? You mentioned Kenneth Abante. I love Kenneth.
Yeah.
I love
Ay,
Kenneth.
chef.
And I love the
Chef.
Move As One coalition, which
Yeah.
I've had the privilege of advising them on certain things. Pero yun, 20 years ago, when I started urban planning and I started writing a blog called Another 100 Years Hence, and yung nom de plume ko, Urbano de la Cruz. Wala pang conversation about how are our cities growing. The conversation in Metro Manila was Problematic. And then the same conversation. We need to decentralize. Stop people from coming to Metro Manila. Or the other problem is traffic. Palaging problema, traffic. That was 20 years ago. And I would think that was representative of 20 years before. Now, though, we talk about transportation instead of traffic being the problem. We talk about these our integrated problems, our housing. We can see the kinds of investments that are not working. Right. So there is progress in how people are thinking. Uh, I, I'm, I'm holding judgment on this new administration whether they can do something about it. It sounds like they're saying that at least the DOTR is saying some of the right things. Pero ganun din yung previous administration until you started seeing it. So, we'll see. So I think from an awareness standpoint, there is progress, but we need to kill two myths. Right. The first myth is that we can solve this by disinvesting in Metro Manila and building a city somewhere else that will take pressure off Metro Manila. That has
Ooh.
never worked. It has never worked
Nako.
in any country. Uh, if you're willing
Nangyayari
to
yan.
wait 80 years,
Right.
that city can grow, but it's not going to solve immediate problems. You hear that everywhere, right? Even on
Yeah.
Facebook, and they'll say, kasi no, we just need to move the other companies out. And my
Yeah.
question is always, let's talk about logistics and how you're actually going to be able to do that. That's part of the question of planning too, is like logistics. So we need to kill that. This is the city we have. Let's be citizens in it, and let's work to make it better.
Nice.
Unless you build a fence around Manila and you tell every couple to not have kids, there's no way you're going to arrest that growth. The second myth is that traffic is the problem we need to solve. It's not. Traffic is a symptom, and traffic congestion is a symptom. And a symptom of having too many vehicles on the road.
Yeah.
Vehicles,
Right.
not people. Right? We can move more people more efficiently
Yeah.
using good public transportation. And good public transportation includes jeepneys and buses and trains and subways and everything else. And less cars. And a whole lot more active transportation. That's bikes. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
now, how did I get here? A question. Has things changing?
Yeah.
I think the conversation is starting to change, and hopefully, so in a previous project I worked on, the a transit center, which is an organization here in the U.S. focused on a foundation focused on cities too, created a document called People's History of Recent Innovations in Urban Transportation. And it looked at, in the cities in the US, which cities moved very quickly with more progressive transportation, meaning they had more bike lanes and rolled out protective bikes and improved public transportation. And what were the ingredients? Yung result ng study nila, they studied 6 cities. There's a triangle that you need. The first leg of the triangle is what they call the citizen pioneers advocates. People who were saying, no, this is the problem, this is what we need to solve, and this is our approaches, right?
Sila
The
Kento,
second-
Ken Abante, no?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The second leg of that triangle for change was political leadership that understood what the problem was, and it was the advocates that both created a space for them and gave them political cover. You also need the third leg, which is the government civil servants who understood the problem and would pursue the right solutions. They would be given political cover by the electeds, and they would be in conversation with the advocates to say, ano ba talaga yung solution, and you engage it.
Yeah.
We need all those three to move things very, very rapidly. And I think they will fall into place. Pero yung key doon, which is why I'm excited
Yeah.
about Move as One and groups like outmobility.ph and Commute and all of that, is nandun na yung advocates and they're strong.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Ayos.
habang sagot, no?
I go back to that time. I think Ken also mentioned how important it is to have allies in the government and in media. Kasi ganun mo lang mapapa-execute yung, di ba, yung mga plano nyo, di ba? You gotta have allies there.
Yeah, before you even get to the plan, right?
Yeah.
The question is, ano yung narrative? Ano yung kwento ano yung stories that we're telling, because that defines what we put our attention to. And
Yeah.
the stories we've been telling for too long is, walang problema, wala nang pag-asa ang Metro Manila, or traffic ang problema, which
Tama.
all are elite, and that means includes the mass media communication elite talk that way.
Yeah.
And so we need to start shifting that.
Benji, your take on build, 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 no? Yan ang great promise ng ating gobyerno from the previous era, di ba? What do you think? Building more roads, building more highways, for for the Metro Manilas.
Benji, I don't know if you rode on the newest Skyway that we that was
Yun,
launched
kakabukas
before.
lang.
Oh,
Pero grabe, Benji,
I
ang mahal. Ang mahal.
Yeah, I
200.
did, because I went from Tagaytay to BGC.
Oh my God.
And then went to Fairview too. So yes. So ang tanong ko with build is what, where,
Okay.
and for who, right? Diba? So again, are we solving the right problems? Ang very clear in urban planning is there's this thing called induced demand, which is the more you build roads, the more traffic you get. In
Totoo yun. Totoo yun.
in math, it's called Jevons paradox, or in economics rather, Jevons paradox. Which, if you make something easier to do, then you're going to congest that. You're going to crowd that. So I'm all for building, except if you're building the wrong, because it's investment, right? And hopefully in our cities. But if you build the wrong thing, then you're solving the wrong problem. So here's a kind of metaphor example. No? Kung problemado yung, let's say, you live in a household of 10 people or 5 people, isa lang yung banyo nyo, nagkaklag palagi, tapos you say, build, magdadagdag tayo ng kitchen, magdadagdag tayo ng sala na malaki. Hindi mo pa rin nasosolve yung banyo problem, di ba? So, again, holding judgment on it. The question is, who, what, where, and for who.
Yeah, kasi nisip ko pa lang, you have to own a car, and you have to pay the toll, and you have to be able to pay the gas, right? That already eliminates probably 70% of the population, di ba?
Yeah. You have to remember, car ownership in the Philippines is still very low.
Yeah.
15%. Ganito na yung traffic natin. Tapos kung gagawin nyo pa, at least we're talking about highways, right? It's like, the people who can afford to pay are above, people who cannot are below. Mas madami yung below.
Yeah.
I'm all for road pricing and road tolling, except that is actually a solution to congestion. But do you do it to privilege people, or do you do it to free things up, right?
Yeah.
So what Singapore does, and London does, and Oslo does, is what's called congestion pricing, where you have an area of the city, you have to pay to go in a private car. If you're coming by public transportation, if you're walking, if you're biking, it's free. But if you want to bring in your
that's
car,
a good idea.
you pay
Yeah.
money.
Right.
That's very different from building an expressway where if you want to travel fast, here you pay.
Galing. Galing, ha? I bet, Benji, nung naisapatupad sa, I think that was 2020 nung COVID times, yung carousel bus natin sa EDSA, di ba? Ngayon may single bus lane na tayo. That moves maybe 50 people in one vehicle, di ba? Probably you like that because you think mobility is a thing, no? Tama ba? Do you think we should push forward for more solutions that are similar in sense?
Yeah, carousel is proto bus rapid transit. It's not a full bus rapid transit, but it basically is a planning decision. What's more important, people or vehicles? What do we count? Do we count the movement of vehicles, or do we count people? If you look at EDSA on any given day, and you're stuck in traffic, count the number of cars and count the number of buses. I assure you, within your line of vision, there will be more people inside the buses than there are people in the cars.
Ooh.
And your cars take up space, 10 square
Yes.
meters yan, di ba?
Yes.
So you clog it up, and so magko-complain tao, ang dami kasi ito mga bus, ganyan. So when they wanted to set aside a lane for buses, to prioritize buses, sabi ko, gagrabe yung traffic. No, traffic for vehicles, but for people, you actually move them faster, right? It's also a statement of value, right? Statement of value saying people who cannot afford a car are as important as people who can. And if we're going to prioritize the movement of people, the thing that moves more people should move faster. So,
Galing.
yun. So yes, uh, we prioritize it, and there are videos online you can find about this that scientifically tracking how fast can you move people if they are on a train or a bus or
Yeah.
cars or bikes or walking. Diba?
Yeah.
And you move way more people in all of those situations than moving people in cars.
Parang
Interesting.
parang Benji, honestly, medyo na-guilty ako dun kasi I take the car, moving around places, going from one place
Mag-guilty
to
ka,
the other.
Lance. Mag-guilty ka.
Okay, na-guilty talaga ako dun, no? But
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
I think of the alternative. If I don't take the car, I have to probably queue at the minimum an
Yeah.
hour just to go to my office, 'di ba? And
Yeah.
pagdating mo pa dun, ano ka na, 'di ba? May
Mm.
makeup ka na item, no? Or pawis na pawis ka na, 'di ba? How do we encourage people that are taking the car or vehicles, their private vehicles, to take probably the alternatives instead? Or am I tackling the right problem or the
You,
right
Or
yeah,
I don't know. Is carpooling a a good
yeah,
solution?
carpooling, yeah,
carpooling is
'di
a
ba?
good solution, a
Pero konti pa rin
partial
'yun.
solution,
Yeah.
partial solution. Was it Enrique Peñalosa, the former mayor of Bogota, who used to say, uh, a developed a developed country is not where the poor have cars; it's where the rich
There we
take
go.
public transportation,
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
right?
Yeah. Ganda.
So we
Yeah.
need to develop public transportation so that it is the most efficient, fastest, most
Thank you.
convenient, and
Thank you.
cheapest way to get there. And ginagawa natin, we keep making it harder for people, even with our planning decisions now. So the EDSA carousel, which by the way, I hate the name dahil parang pangterya, di ba? Laruan,
Parang
carousel lang yan.
circus.
It's not rapid transit, which that the technical term should be bus rapid transit. We created that. If you used to live in Fairview, you could take one ride from Fairview to Makati. Now you have to get off and try to get on a carousel, and then good yung the carousel itself because it cuts it down to 15 minutes. Pero now you have to get on and off and queue and all of that. So if you start from people and how people travel and make it really easy for them, reduce the queuing, prioritize the volume so that it takes just minutes to wait for this, then it'll be easier for people who have a choice to say, yeah, why should I take the car? Tapos, yun yung carrot, diba? You can take public transportation, it'll be faster, or you can ride the bike, it'll be faster and safe. Versus, you can take your car, you have to sit in
Parking.
traffic.
Yeah.
Maybe traffic isn't so bad. You have to pay for parking, and if we put in congestion pricing, you have to pay for congestion pricing.
Exactly.
Then it's costlier. If you really can afford it, go ahead. Right? What it also does, it cuts down on unnecessary car trips.
Exactly.
Diba? And then parang, so what we need to do is give people options and prioritize the options that move more people and
Thank you.
move people with dignity.
Right.
I think, Matt, sana mga kumpanya rin encourages that. Maybe, I don't know, give
I think
bonus
they
for those that
encourage
take
different things.
bicycles.
Well,
Pag nag-bike ka
here's
to
an
work, di ba?
so here's example, right? If you're in a big company in the Philippines and you get to manager, ano yung benefit mo? First benefit.
Parking slot.
Siyempre, car.
Car
Oo.
Car
parking slot
loan.
or car
Gas,
loan.
gas,
Yes.
You
gas.
get a car loan, di ba? Di ba? In fact,
Yeah.
sometimes two. Tapos, pag medyo senior manager ka na, you get a company car. Pag executive ka, company car na. So clearly, cars are being valued. Right? Do we have commuter benefits that will pay for your public transportation?
Ayun,
Do we
yes.
have
Ooh.
biking facilities? That's starting to happen. You're starting to see a lot of buildings with biking facilities na. Pero parang, exactly as you said, may shower rooms ba? So that when you get there, you can change?
Ay, oo. Pati mga ganun, no? That's so interesting, huh? Yeah.
So there are things that you can, again, urban planner, extreme generalist, no? Di ba?
Yeah.
Shouldn't you get health benefit insurance credits if you bike to work? Because you're being healthy.
Tama.
And
Tama.
you're 10 times healthier than sitting in
Tama.
a car driving. So there are things that you can encourage from corporate,
Yeah.
including things like maybe you can live near where you work. So you look at places like BGC or Makati or Eastwood na, di ba? Parang, galing multi-use, and then there are condos. Pero if you are a sales lady in SM or any of the department stores, can you afford to live nearby?
Yeah,
No,
yeah. That's a
right?
common criticism there too. Yeah.
If we make the decision to say, okay, you can build your tall building, but you have to have affordable housing in it, so that people
Yeah.
who work there can live near there, then that means that you also eliminate traffic, the need to travel, right? In
Yeah.
transportation circles, we have this thing called avoid, shift, improve. One you want to do is avoid trips. So if I can just walk to somewhere, then that's great because I'm avoiding a trip.
Yeah.
Or you shift it, which is exactly what you're saying, Lance, na parang instead of taking my car, I'm going to shift it because I actually get there sooner and more comfortably, and I don't have to be driving. I can read or do something else. I can be on my phone. If I take public transportation, or I'll be healthier if I ride a bike or get a bike share, and or improve, and that could be better transportation or also in climate terms electric vehicles. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
habang sagot
I love the discussion because it kind of like tackles about, what are we incentivizing as a
Yeah.
society, what are our values, what are our priorities, and obviously, there's a lot of stakeholders in this, in incorporating these
Mm.
decisions in urban planning. So I'll ask you that later on, but
Mhm.
I'm curious, what do you think about the subway plans that they have in the future?
Yun, you just said in the future, no? Gaano katagal?
Oh,
So, MRT7, kailan bubukas ang MRT7? Gaano katagal na yun? Here's the thing, right? You can say, we will build that, and it will solve things 10 years from now, but you don't know what the problems are. Or you can say, what do we have now? What can we invest in now so we can make things better?
right.
And so we will need subways because we are a huge city. But every big city you look at, even if they have lots of rail, possible exception of Tokyo, uh,
Uh-huh.
yung bus commuters and bus trips are usually 3 to 5 times bigger than rail.
Wow. Okay.
So yes, we need subways, we need rail, and first of all, we have to stop building them where we think it will solve traffic. No, we build them where people need to go. Yun yung problema ng EDSA LRT. We built it to try
Right.
to solve traffic. It doesn't solve traffic. It
That's
moves
so
people.
interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
so then you go and say, how much are we investing in buses and jeeps? Because that's how people get around. That's how 80% of our people who live in Metro Manila get around. Let's invest in that, and that includes both vehicles, business models, uh, jobs and salaries, and infrastructure. Right. So if you pass through EDSA, we have those very sad-looking bus stations. Or in
Yeah.
Carousel itself, yung original plan nun, pwede kang tumawid ng EDSA to get into it. Now we make people climb up on the LRT and come down. It's on the wrong side. So yes, we need subways. That's the 10 to 20-year plan. We need buses and jeeps that work and a whole lot more of them. And that's something we can do in the next 2 to 5 years.
Ay, 2 to 5 years.
And we need to prioritize them on the
Ay,
list.
nako. Yung sa Commonwealth nga, I mean, I live near Commonwealth kasi
Yeah.
2016 nata nagsimula yun. 2022 na, wala pa rin eh.
Mm.
I mean, 2023 na pala, wala pa rin. So,
Going back to your question, Lance, of what can ordinary people do is one, pay attention, diba? What is the problem they're trying to solve? Second, get involved. Like, ano ba yung design ng stasyon? Does it,
Mm.
so as an example, no? When we built MRT3 on EDSA, yung choice ng stations was not about making it people for easier for people who are taking public transportation to get from a jeep or a bus to get on the MRT. It was, where can we put a mall, right? So things like, where Ortigas Station is somewhere between SM, a mega mall, and Robinson's Galleria, right next to ADB. Why did they
Uh-huh.
put it there? when it was easier to either get off, Shaw or get off at Ortigas because then you could connect. Or my favorite example is the Santolan uh, MRT
Yeah.
station, which is in front of Camp Crame, and you have to walk 800 meters to get to the jeep. Bakit? Right? Or if you look at any of the station and how easy is it to get down, and I'm sure you're seeing pictures, right, and
Exactly.
walk on the sidewalk. Hardly any because we prioritize cars. So for citizens, part of urban planning or being aware of it is saying, ano ba yung decision? What are they making? And how do we have an input in that? And are
Yeah.
they prioritizing what we need? Hindi lang yung mga needs ng
Yeah.
nakakotse katulad mo, Lance.
Yeah.
Making you guilty.
Uy. Uy. Thank you, Benji. No, I can't help but think maybe decision makers talaga kulang sa empathizing. You really
Mm.
have to try it para, di di ba? Para ma-realize mo talaga yung problema, right?
Yeah.
Ayun. Sige, Benji, I think we're going to the last part of the episode, which is to, ask for our audience, no, who wants to try out a career similar to yours, no, what's in it for them, diba? I guess yung first question ko, no, urban planning in the Philippines, no, is that possible? Is that a possible career? And probably where can they get started? Is there a company that you would look out for, or maybe sila move as one ba dun ba yung start ng mga to in case they're interested with urban planning?
Yes, there's lots of online communities if you're interested, right? So,
Ooh,
Move as One Coalition, particularly on transportation. Merong Urban Philippines group, so there's lots of online groups if you want to get kind of initiated. If you want a degree, I think only UP has the School of Urban and Regional Planning,
yeah.
so as a master's degree that you can look at. Or if you're willing to try to see where can I study elsewhere, lots of schools abroad, including mga scholarships that are available. So the UK has the Chevening Scholarship I think it's a 1 year or
Wow.
2 year masters in UK schools. A lot of uh, the movers in Move as One went to Chevening or took the Chevening program. So pwede yun. And the other is to read up a lot. And again, ang advice ko is fall in love with the problems, not the solutions. Don't fall in love with
Tama.
solutions. Just always
Oh,
think about it
interesting.
and always think about the systems. Now, will it make you a lot of money? Probably not. Unless you
Yun
are
lang.
working for a very large corporation that's a developer, say an Ayala Corporation, right, where they do large scale development, then maybe you could become one of the senior VPs who is in charge of planning or whatever. But is it a good place to be thinking about the world and how people live? Yes. Do you have to be very patient? Absolutely. Right. And anyway, so yes. So you can start by reading a lot about
Yeah.
it. There are lots of blogs,
Mhm.
and also just studying, reading books,
Awesome.
and always holding things. Don't fall in love with ito na yung solution. No? For instance, smart
Yeah.
city. All we need is a lot of technology. Don't always question that, because if you are an urban planner, the first question you ask is why is this happening, and what would happen if we do this.
Galing. Benji, top people to follow. Obviously, besides Benji de la Peña. No? Honestly, when I was looking at
Siyempre.
urban planning career people in kung sino pwede namin invite, I had a hard time. So I don't know where to look in terms of looking for those people. No, and any specific people that you'd like to mention, local, international authors, okay lang.
Local, if you're much more interested in urban design and
Urban design.
landscape architecture, Paulo Alcazarin.
Okay.
Is pretty good about, and the work they've done in Iloilo, I think, is really, really interesting. In terms of Move as One Coalition, Ken Abante, Ira Cruz with Alt Mobility, .ph,
Yeah.
Robbie C, who writes the C father and son, right? So Robbie C, who writes on In Manila Times, his column is great. Anton C, who is his son, who I think was the head of Pasig Transport for a while, also is very,
Mm,
very active.
I see.
Dami rin.
How's your Viaje Bes? There's a whole bunch of people on that. Internationally, there's lots, right? Brent Toderian is one that people like to turn to. He writes about transportation and land use in cities. Uh, Follow me, and I will tweet about people. I don't tweet anymore. I'm on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, LinkedIn. Okay.
LinkedIn, and I will. I There are a whole bunch of people I follow there. The Global Partnership for Popular Transportation, which I chair, Shared Use Mobility Center.
Yeah.
Madaming really, really small segment of kind of experts in this place. There's Janet Sadik Khan,
Mm.
who used to be the planner of New York, Harriet Dragoning, which I had the privilege of working with, used to be the planner of DC. Uh, so madami. So, yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Of course, Benji, yung newsletter mo, di ba?
Yeah, but I
The
haven't.
sport,
Makeshift Mobility is about informal
i-
transportation,
there
yes.
you go, right?
Uh,
Siyempre.
and yeah, and there's a number of really, really good books.
Yeah.
Um, um, Alain Bertod has a book called Order Without Design, which is pretty good.
Hmm.
Uh, who else? Dami. Jane Jacobs, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, is a classic book that people need to read. Madami.
I don't know if you're familiar with the show Parks and Recreation,
Oh
but
yeah,
yeah, it's a pretty
Leslie
funny
No.
show, but I think it also delves into like the difficulty of even urban planning, because in
Yeah,
their sense they're trying to plan out like what to do in a
parks.
certain city, like parks and whatnot. No,
Yeah.
so I guess it brings about a question. What are your tips, I guess, for urban planners or aspiring urban planners? How do you balance the competing interests from developers, from the residents, from government, and whoever
Yeah.
else stakeholders? No, what's your siguro your top tips for them to kind of like balance these interests and perspectives?
Well, one, Del Lazaro, who was the former Minister of Education, I'm sorry, of Energy, Secretary of
Yeah,
Energy, if you remember, um, advised us once, a whole bunch of us, when I was in my 20s, to say, you should work in government once in your life, if
yeah,
only to understand that no matter how well intentioned something is, it's going to be hard to implement it. Not because anyone's against it, there's just so many rules that you have to get past.
Yeah.
So the first thing for urban planners is you need to be patient. Second
uh-huh.
is to be very clear, who are you serving, right? And
Right,
that is all about the solutions, right? Are you serving people who can afford things and own cars? Are you serving developing or developers? Are you serving people and their needs, right? And once
gotcha.
you're very clear on that, then you can start attacking the right things. The other is you have to understand systems. So here's another recommended reading. Donella Meadows has a little monograph. It's very short. It's the 12 leverage points in a system. So Donella Meadows is late Donella Meadows was a systems thinker, and along with Jay Forrester, founded kind of the disciplines of system dynamics. And she basically says, in a system, here are the places that you can intervene it to change a system.
Uh-huh.
Read it so that then you understand how do you change something, and that gives you both hope and also an understanding of how systems work, but also patience because these are big systems we're trying to change. Um, yeah. So patience, understand systems, be curious, always be curious, and never take the obvious solution as the most obvious thing. You have to understand the why, right, of why things are happening.
Yung. Benji, I think that's it,
All right.
An episode is done. Sobrang dami naming natutunan. Thank you so much, Benji, for joining us in the Off the Beaten Path, no? I hope. Honestly, gusto ko na rin maging urban planner, no? After your your episode, di ba?
Yeah.
So let me read up on those books that you mentioned. Perhaps I can go into your careers. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Benji, anyways, anything you're excited about that you want to just talk about before we let you go?
Yeah. I'm excited about what we can do in Metro Manila, and really excited about groups like Move as One Coalition
Yeah.
and the work they're doing. I thank you for having me. Thank you that people are interested in urban planning in the way we do our cities. If anyone tells you that we need to decongest Metro Manila and move people out and build new cities, ask them, how are you going to do it?
Yeah.
So, and then follow me. If you're interested in urban planning, reach out over LinkedIn. I'm happy to always give the time to people to talk about
Yeah.
their interests. So yeah,
And of course, subscribe tayo sa Makeshift Mobility ni
Oo,
Benji, no?
oo.
Mhm.
He's writing a lot of his thoughts there as well.
You know what, Benji? You're saying that the conversation is changing around urban planning and the stuff that the government is doing. I think it's because precisely because of people like you and Kenneth, diba? We're opening up the conversation, and I hope this episode helps with that also.
I hope so.
And,
I hope so. And globally too, we're really looking at I don't know what's happening with climate change and what can
Yeah.
we do, right? And what kind of decisions are we making? So um, I think they're all interconnected. As the generalist of urban planner that as I am, there's usually not just one singular cause.
Awesome. Benji, thank you so much for joining us. That's it. And thank you guys, Offbeat, for listening to the show again. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Salamat.